It happened on her third day. Nobody plans to blow their cover on day 3. But then again, nobody plans for Han Seo. Zara had walked into Han Seo construction with one job: get the financial records. Get out. Leave nothing behind. She had done this before. Different cities, different names, different men who thought they were untouchable. She knew how to disappear inside a building, how to become the person nobody remembers at the end of the day, the one who refills the printer paper and answers emails and never once makes anyone uncomfortable. Invisibility was not a skill for Zara. It was a language she had been speaking her whole life. Han Seo was not in the file the way she expected. The file said dangerous. She expected loud, intimidating, the kind of man who filled a room with noise and made sure everyone felt it. What she got was silence. He arrived at 7:50 a.m. every morning without fails, moved through the building like the building had been designed around him, spoke only when necessary and never once repeated himself. His staff did not fear him the way people fear someone who shouts. They feared him the way people fear a locked door. You never knew what was behind it, and he was never going to tell you. Zara watched all of this from her desk on the second floor and filed it away carefully. Cold, controlled, indifferent. She could work with indifferent. Indifferent meant he was not looking at her, and not looking at her meant she could look at everything else. The corridor briefing on Wednesday morning was routine. 8 people. Han Seo at the front, his right-hand man beside him, 2 senior managers, support staff filling the rest of the space. The Mapo development was third on the agenda. Han Seo's largest active project, 40 floors in central Seoul, and the exact channel her handler had sent her here to trace. Zara had spent Tuesday evening going through the project files and found something that stopped her cold. A subcontractor scheduling conflict buried deep in the appendix. The kind of thing that looks like a small administrative oversight until you follow the numbers far enough and realize it becomes 400 million won hemorrhaging out of the company by end of quarter. She raised it in the briefing. Clearly, specifically, page reference included. Han Seo did not look up from his own documents. His right-hand man glanced at her once and looked away. The briefing moved on like she hadn't spoken at all. Zara sat with that for a moment. Wrote the number at the top of her notepad, circled it, told herself to let it go, put her pen down, picked it up again. She watched Han Seo turn and walk away, his right-hand man beside him, 2 managers falling into step behind. Zara thought about her handler's voice on the phone last week. Do not get noticed. She looked at the number on her notepad, looked at his back, closed the notepad, and followed him. Mr. Han. Nothing. Mr. Han. He stopped, the way you stop when you hear something you genuinely did not expect to hear again. He turned around slowly, and this time he actually looked at her, not past her, not through her, at her, like she had just become a problem he hadn't accounted for. The corridor was absolutely still. The timeline error on the Mapo development, the one I just flagged that you walked away from, will cost this company 400 million won by Friday. She let that land. You can keep walking, Mr. Han. The smallest tilt of her head. Or you can listen. 4 people, not one of them breathing. Han Seo looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. It wasn't anger. It wasn't irritation. It was something quieter than both, and somehow more unsettling. Then, without a word, he turned back around and walked away. Zara stood in the empty corridor, notepad in hand, pulse steady, expression clean. She was fine. She was always fine. But something underneath all of that fine had just woken up. She just made the most dangerous man in Seoul stop walking, and he still didn't give her an answer. Subscribe and hit the bell. You do not want to miss where this goes. He walked into her office the next morning at exactly 7:50 a.m. She knew because she had been watching the clock, not because she was waiting for him, but because knowing when Han Seo moved through the building was the same as knowing when the weather was about to change. You paid attention not out of interest but out of necessity. He passed her desk without looking at it. Same as Tuesday. Same as Monday. Same as every morning since she had arrived. Zara watched him disappear into his office and turned back to her screen. This was the job. Not the financial records. Not the shell companies. Not the offshore accounts her handler was waiting on. This, right here, was the job. Becoming so ordinary that nobody thought to question her. The woman who came early, stayed late, never complained, never caused problems, never made anyone feel watched. She was very good at this part. What she had not anticipated was how much of her day would be spent watching Han Seo be cruel to people who had done nothing wrong. Not cruel the way people expect cruelty to look. He never raised his voice, never threw anything, never made a scene. He was cruel the way a winter morning is cruel, quietly, completely, without caring whether you were ready for it or not. She watched him cut off a project manager mid-presentation without looking up from his phone. Watched him return a junior analyst report with a single word written across the top in red pen. Wrong. No explanation. No guidance. Just that one word sitting there like a door slammed in the face. Watched him walk past the woman at the front desk. The one who had clearly been working there for years based on the way she had every visitor's name memorized, without once acknowledging she existed. Zara wrote none of this down. It was not relevant to her mission. She told herself this several times throughout the day. By Thursday, she had identified the access pattern for the fourth-floor filing room. 3 people went in, always alone, always after 7 p.m. She needed one more week before she could move on it safely. By Friday, she had mapped every blind spot in the building's security camera coverage. By Friday evening, she was the last person on the 2nd floor, the cleaners moving through the distant corridors, the building settling into its nighttime quiet. She was going through construction permit records that were almost certainly fabricated when she heard footsteps. Han Seo walked past her desk. Did not stop. Did not look. Zara watched his back until he turned the corner, then looked back at her screen. Told herself this was fine. All of this was exactly fine. She was invisible. She was on schedule. She was in complete control of everything about this situation. Everything. Except the part where she could still feel exactly where she had been standing in that corridor yesterday when he turned around and actually looked at her. She closed that thought like a file she had no business opening, turned back to the fabricated permits, and got back to work. He called a full team meeting on Monday morning. Zara found out about it the same way she found out about everything in this building, by paying attention to things nobody thought she was paying attention to. She arrived early, took a seat near the back, opened her notepad. 17 people around a long conference table. Han Seo at the head, his right-hand man to his left, senior managers filling the rest of the seats, support staff like Zara lining the walls. The Mapo development was the main agenda item. Zara had spent the weekend going through the full project file again, deeper this time, following threads she had only glanced at during the week. And the subcontractor conflict she had flagged in the corridor briefing was worse than she initially thought. It wasn't just a scheduling overlap. It was a cascading failure sitting quietly inside the project timeline, waiting for the right moment to become catastrophic. 400 million won was the conservative estimate. If the conflict triggered a delay penalty clause buried in the main contractor agreement, the number doubled. She had a full breakdown in her notepad. Page references, clause numbers, projected loss scenarios. Han Seo opened the floor of the Mapo development 20 minutes into the meeting. Zara raised her hand. He did not look at her side of the room. She kept her hand up. He called on the senior project manager instead. The manager gave a surface-level update. Timeline on track. No significant issues flagged. Team performing well. Zara looked at her notepad, then at Han Seo, then back at her notepad. She told herself this was not her problem. She was not here to save his company. She was here to dismantle it. The last thing she needed was to keep drawing attention to herself over an error that did not affect her mission. She put her hand down. The meeting moved on. Han Seo stood to close 20 minutes later, gave 3 sharp directives to his right-hand man, and walked out without looking at anyone directly. Zara sat at the table after everyone had filed out. Just her and the empty chairs and the number in her notepad. 800 million won if the penalty clause triggered. She closed the notepad, stood up, told herself to walk back to her desk and forget about it. She walked to the door, stopped, turned around, picked up her notepad, and went after him. She found him in the corridor outside his office, his right-hand man beside him, both of them mid-conversation. "Mr. Han." Neither of them stopped. "Mr. Han." His right-hand man glanced back at her. Han Seo kept walking. Zara took 3 quick steps forward and placed herself directly in their path. Not aggressive, not loud, just immovable, the way a fact is immovable. Han Seo stopped, looked at her with the particular expression of a man who had just run out of patience for something he never had patience for to begin with. The subcontractor conflict on Mapo isn't a scheduling issue. She opened her notepad to the right page without looking down. It triggers a penalty clause in the main contractor agreement. You're not looking at 400 million. You're looking at 800. By the end of the quarter, she held the notepad out toward him. He did not take it, did not look at it, looked at her instead, with an expression she could not fully read. "Leave it with my assistant." He walked around her. His right-hand man followed. Zara stood in the corridor holding her notepad, watched them go, then looked down at the numbers she had spent her weekend calculating for a man who still hadn't said her name. She told herself it didn't matter. She was almost certain she believed it. She left the notepad with his assistant, went back to her desk, opened her laptop, and told herself she was done with it. By 2 p.m. she had received no response. By 4 p.m. the project manager whose department on the era had walked past her desk twice without making eye contact. By 5:30 p.m. everyone had gone home except Zara and the kind of quiet that settles into an office when the day has decided it is finished. She was closing her laptop when Han Seo's assistant appeared at her desk. "Mr. Han will see you now." His office was exactly what the building suggested it would be. Large, spare, functional. A desk that held only what was immediately necessary. No photographs, no decoration, nothing that told you anything about who Han Seo was when he was not being this. He was standing when she walked in, which surprised her. She had expected him behind the desk, seated, the width of it between them like a statement. Instead, he was at the window, looking out at the city, hands in his pockets, and he did not turn around immediately when she entered. Zara stood and waited. She was good at waiting. He turned around eventually, looked at her the way he had been looking at her since the corridor, like she was a problem he was still deciding how to categorize. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk without saying anything. She sat. He sat. Walk me through it. No preamble, no acknowledgement that he had ignored her twice, no explanation of why it had taken until 5:30 p.m. Just those 4 words sitting in the air between them like that was all the invitation she was ever going to get. Zara opened her notepad and walked him through it. She did not hurry, did not soften the numbers, did not apologize for being in his office or taking his time or being right about something his entire project team had missed. She just laid it out, clean and precise, the way she laid everything out. Han Seo did not interrupt, did not look at his phone, did not do the thing she had watched him do in every meeting she had attended. The slow withdrawal of attention that told you he had already stopped listening and was simply waiting for you to finish. He listened, actually listened. When she finished, she closed a notepad and waited. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the document she had placed in front of him, a slight tension in his jaw that she was learning to read as the closest thing to visible discomfort he allowed himself in front of other people. "How long did this take you?" "The weekend." He looked up at that. Something moved across his face too quickly for her to name it. "Fix it." "That's not my department." "It is now." He looked back down at the document. The meeting was over. She understood this without being told, stood and picked up a notepad and walked to the door. "Mensa." She stopped. He still wasn't looking at her. Next time, bring it directly to me. Zara stood at the door for a moment. You walked away from it twice, Mr. Han. The silence that followed had a different quality to it than any silence she had experienced in this building. She left before it could become something else. The board meeting was on a Thursday. Zara found out about it on Wednesday evening when Han Seo's assistant sent a calendar invite to the full senior team and, for the first time since she had arrived, included her name on the list. She read the invite twice, then closed her laptop and sat with that for a moment. Being included meant she had become visible enough to be useful. Visible enough to be useful was not the same as visible enough to be suspected, but it was closer to that line than she was comfortable with. She arrived early, took a seat along the wall, opened her notepad, and reminded herself that she was support staff, there to observe, there to take notes, there to be so unremarkable that nobody remembered she had been in the room at all. Han Seo presented the new 5U development strategy himself. No slides, no handouts, just him standing at the head of the table talking through numbers and projections and timelines with the flat precision of a man who had never once needed a visual aid to make people pay attention. Zara wrote everything down, and 20 minutes later she found it. A structural flaw in the revenue projection model, subtle, the kind of thing that required a very specific combination of financial and operational knowledge to catch, but significant enough that within 6 months it would force an external audit of the subsidiary accounts. The exact accounts her handler had sent her here to trace. If those accounts were audited, everything unraveled. Not just for Han Seo. For the rival syndicate that sent her here too. Zara sat very still. She thought about this carefully. If she stayed silent, the flaw would surface on its own eventually, and the audit would happen regardless. Her handler's entire operation would be exposed, her mission would fail, and she would have nothing to show for 3 weeks of careful invisible work. If she spoke, she blew the cover she had spent 3 weeks building. She looked at her notepad, looked at Han Seo. He finished his presentation and opened the floor. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when nobody wants to be the first to speak in front of a man like Han Seo. Senior managers studied their papers, looked at each other, looked at their hands. Nobody moved. Zara raised her hand. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. The kind that happens when something unexpected has just occurred and the room has not yet decided how to respond to it. Han Seo looked at her. For the 3rd time in 3 weeks, he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. She is about to risk everything she came here to do, to save the man she was sent here to destroy. If this story has you hooked, drop a fire emoji right now. I want to see you watching. She did not ask for permission. She stood up, walked to the front of the room, and pulled up the projection model on the presentation screen like she had been invited to do exactly that. Nobody stopped her. Nobody said anything at all. Zara did not look at Han Seo while she was speaking. She did not need to. She could feel the quality of his attention the way you feel a change in air pressure. Something shifts and you know before you have any evidence that the weather is about to be different. She took the room through the floor methodically. No unnecessary words. No hedging. No softening of what the numbers actually meant. The revenue projection assumed a stable subsidiary structure through year 3. It was not going to be stable through year 3. Here was why. Here was the clause. Here was what happened to the audit timeline when the clause triggered. Here was the corrected model she had built in the margin of her notepad during the presentation. She wrote the corrected figures on the screen, set the pen down, and waited. The room had the particular silence of people who were not sure whether they had just watched something impressive or something they were going to have to pretend they had not seen. The senior manager whose department owned the projection model cleared his throat. The methodology is sound. The assumptions we used were standard practice for. Han Seo raised one hand. The man stopped mid-sentence. Han Seo was looking at the corrected model on the screen, expression giving nothing away, jaw slightly tight, the way it got when he was working something out that he had not expected to have to work out. He looked at it for a long moment. Meeting is over. Chairs scraped back, papers gathered, People filed out with the careful quietness of those who understood they had witnessed something they would be discussing in private for days. Zara began collecting her things. Minsa. She looked up. Han Seo was still seated, still looking at the screen. Not at her. My office. 7 o'clock. He stood and walked out before she could respond. Zara stood at the front of the emptied room, the corrected model still glowing on the screen behind her. She thought about the 3 weeks she had spent becoming invisible in this building. The careful, deliberate, unremarkable invisibility she had constructed day by day, and how thoroughly she had just dismantled it in 12 minutes, in front of his entire inner circle. For the second time, she turned off the presentation screen, picked up her notepad, and told herself this was still manageable. She was almost convincing. 7 o'clock. The building had emptied the way buildings empty when the day is genuinely finished. Not the polite half-empty of 5:30 p.m. when people were still checking their phones at the door, but the real quiet, the kind that meant she and Han Seo were almost certainly the only 2 people left on this floor. She knocked once. Come in. He was behind his desk this time, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, the neck tattoo more visible than usual without the formality of a fully buttoned collar. He looked like a man who had been in this office for hours and intended to be here for several more. He did not look up immediately when she entered. She sat without being asked. He finished what he was reading, set it down, and looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the one that meant he was not going to say what he was actually thinking, and she was supposed to understand that. Your background check came back clean. I know. I ran it twice. Zara held his gaze without moving. Most people would take that as a compliment, Mr. Han. Most people aren't flagging 800 million won errors in their second week. The air in the room was different to every previous conversation they had been in together. She could not have explained exactly how, only that the distance between professional and something else felt shorter in this room at this hour than it had any right to feel. I'm good at my job. Yes. He leaned back, studying her the way she had been studying him for weeks. That's what I can't work out. What can't you work out? Why is someone as good as you working at a level 2 analyst position in a mid-tier construction firm? Zara said nothing. He tilted his head slightly. Either you're hiding from something. A pause. Or you're looking for something. The silence stretched between them. Zara looked at him steadily. Maybe I just needed a job, Mr. Han. He looked at her for a long moment, the way he looked at documents he hadn't finished reading, like he had found something worth returning to. You can go. She stood, walked to the door. Minsa. She stopped, did not turn around. Don't make plans for Saturday. She turned then. He was already looking back at his documents. We have a site visit on the Mapo development, he said without looking up. Since it's apparently your project now. Zara stood at the door, thought about her handler, thought about the filing room on the 4th floor, thought about the fact that Han Seo had just invented a reason to spend a Saturday with her and called it professional. I'll be ready at 8. She left. She found it on Friday night. 3 weeks and 4 days after walking into Han Seo construction with a cover identity and a deadline. The 4th floor filing room was exactly what she had known it would be from the moment she identified it on the building schematic. Small, climate-controlled, the kind of room that did not appear on visitor guides or emergency exit maps, the kind of room that only existed because someone needed somewhere to keep things that could not exist on a server. Zara moved through it with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this in darker rooms with higher stakes. She found the shell company registrations first, then the offshore account records, then the transfer logs dating back 4 years, names, amounts, dates, routing codes, a complete and detailed map of everyone that had moved through Han Seo construction and precisely where it had gone. It was everything, more than everything. Her handler had sent her here expecting fragments, partial records, enough to begin building a case. What Zara had found was the entire case, ready-made, airtight, the kind of evidence that ended things completely and permanently. She photographed every page, methodical, thorough, leaving nothing behind and nothing disturbed. Walked out of the building at midnight. Sat in her car. Opened her phone. Her handler's number was already on the screen. She had typed it before she left the building, finger hovering over the call the whole way down in the elevator. She sat in the dark and looked at it. The city moved around her the way Seoul always moved at midnight, indifferent and enormous, people going somewhere coming from somewhere, lights changing. The world continued at its usual pace, completely unaware that inside a parked car on a quiet street a woman was holding something in her hands that could bring down 3 syndicates and 2 government officials and 1 man who ran a construction company that was not really a construction company. She thought about Han Seo rolling up his shirt sleeves at 7 o'clock. Thought about the way he had said, "Since it's apparently your project now," without looking up, like it was nothing. Like it was just a practical statement about project ownership and not an invented reason to spend a Saturday in her company. Thought about either you're hiding from something or you're looking for something. She thought about how close he had come. Her handler answered on the second ring. "Do you have something?" Zara looked at the files on her phone. "Not yet." A pause. "It's been almost 4 weeks." "I know. Zara. I need more time." She ended the call before he could respond. Sat in the dark for a long time after. The files still on her phone. Unsent. She told herself she needed more time because the evidence needed corroborating. She told herself she needed more time because one set of records was not enough. She told herself a lot of things while sitting in that car at midnight. The only one she could not bring herself to examine too closely was a real one. Saturday morning. Han Seo was already at the Mapo site when she arrived. Standing at the edge of the construction boundary, hard hat in hand, looking up at the steel frame of what would eventually be 40 floors of mixed-use development in the heart of Seoul, looking at it the way people look at things they built from nothing and are not yet finished building. Zara had seen a lot of things in the time she had spent around dangerous men. She had never seen one look at something the way Han Seo looked at that building. Like it mattered, like he had put something real into it that had nothing to do with the money moving through its accounts. He heard her footsteps on the gravel and turned. Looked at her the way he always looked at her now. Direct, unhurried, like he had already decided she was worth the full weight of his attention and was simply waiting for her to catch up to that fact. "You early. So are you." He handed her a hard hat without comment. They walked the site for 2 hours. Han Seo knew every corner of it, every subcontractor, every delay and its reason, every decision that had been made and why. He spoke about it with a specificity that told her this was not a man who had handed a project to a team and stepped back. He had built this. Personally, actively, with the kind of attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. Zara listened and asked questions and took notes and told herself she was here professionally. This was reconnaissance. This was her learning the physical layout of the operation she had been sent to dismantle. She almost believed it. They stopped at the eastern boundary where the city opened up behind them. Seoul in the morning light, vast and indifferent and beautiful. Han Seo stood beside her looking at it. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Why construction?" He glanced at her. "My father built things." A pause. He was not a good man, but he built things that lasted. I understood that, even when I didn't understand anything else about him. Zara looked at the skyline, filed that away in a place that was not the same place she filed operational intelligence. The Mapo Tower will outlast everything else about this company. Han Seo said quietly. "Whatever else happens, that will still be standing." Zara turned to look at him. He was still looking at the city, jaw set, something in his expression that was completely unguarded in a way she had not seen from him inside the building, in a way she suspected very few people had ever seen from him at all. She thought about the files on her phone, about her handler's voice, about 3 syndicates and 2 government officials and 1 very powerful man whose carefully constructed world would end the moment she pressed send. She thought about whatever else happens, like he already knew something was coming, like he had already made his peace with it. We should get back, she said quietly. Han Seo looked at her then, really looked, the way he had looked at her in that corridor on day 3, like she had just become a problem he hadn't accounted for. Except this time it was different. This time he looked at her like she was a problem he had no intention of solving. Yes, he said. Neither of them moved. The city stretched out behind them, enormous and unhearing. And somewhere in Zara's pocket, on a phone she did not reach for, the files stayed exactly where they were. He just told her the building will outlast everything else about this company, and she still hasn't sent those files. The next story is coming, and I promise you, you are not ready for what she decides. Like this video, subscribe, and drop a comment below. I'll see you in the next one.